Many, not all, Americans won't accept anything less, will they, than a guilty verdict? I mean, they see it as an open and shut case.
Yeah, and they say that this case, if you cannot convict in this case, many Americans feel, what case against a police officer can you possibly convict in? The prosecution relied really on what they saw as a preponderance of evidence in favor of convicting this former police officer in Minneapolis, Derek Chauvin. They showed a video, including the famous 9 minutes and 29 seconds, Stuart, in which George Floyd, a black man, was handcuffed and held down, face down, pinned under the knee of Derek Chauvin. 9 minutes and 29 seconds, during which bystanders gathered on the street scene around the street, praying, basically pleading with the police to use less force. Can't they see that this man is in distress? He's possibly dying. The police officer not reacting. The prosecution also drawing on overwhelming number of witnesses, medical testimony, pointing to the fact that he died not, as the prosecution said, of drugs or an overdose, but rather of asphyxia. He simply did not have enough air to breathe. And finally, policing experts who basically one after the other, a string of them testifying, Stuart, that Derek Chauvin, the former officer, violated both policing policies and guidelines time and again throughout that excruciating, painful 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Now, the defense obviously falling back on another argument, saying there are parts of that tape that before the 9 minutes and 29 seconds that also need to be taken into consideration, the proper context, as they say. Basically, as civil rights activists see it, falling back on a lot of racist tropes and stereotypes, calling George Floyd, the black man who was pinned and murdered, basically has superhuman strength, that he was on something. These are tropes that the activists say we hear time and again in America when it comes to white officers, especially fatally shooting black or Latino or minority victims, that they're somehow too strong, they overpower officers, they're inevitably on drugs, they're too dangerous. You don't hear that as often when it involves white people being handcuffed and arrested.
And Doug, let's not forget as well, I mean, the tally of fatal police shootings against civilians, I mean, it rose steadily even as this trial was progressing, didn't it?
It really did. Obviously we were all focused on this case, but, even during this case, there was another fatal shooting that gathered international headlines of Daunte Wright, who was basically stopped at a traffic stop or traffic violation. And he was shot by an officer who said she mistook her gun for a taser. And time and again during this, we had a 13-year-old in Toledo, a 13-year-old Adam Toledo, who was gunned down, chased down an alley in Chicago. He was turning around with his hands up when he was fatally shot. In Jacksonville, Florida, we had a fatal shooting during this trial. In New Hampshire, we had a fatal shooting by officers. We had at least 64 civilians killed at the hands of law enforcement while this trial was underway. Many of those point to the really stark inequalities in America and the circumstances of a lot of the people who are often victims in these, not just minorities and black, but in the case of these 64 tallied by the New York Times, you had a lot of them who were mentally ill, some of them who were wielding weapons, wielding arms, so once again bringing in the whole firearms issue in America, others in response to domestic abuse, another giant problem in America. So you can see right away, yes, there are giant racism and inequality issues, but also this trial shined a spotlight on the types of people who are often the victims, often the ones on the receiving ends of these fatal shootings in America, and the stark social inequalities that exist in the country.
International Affairs commentator Doug Herbert, thanks very much.